Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarini Teen Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. I am here with my monthly recap video, recapping November 2022. I'm quite a few days late on this one. I'm usually pretty close to right at the end of the month. November has been a whirlwind, so I have a couple of things to share. A lot of the whirlwind has been work life, so I'm not going to get into that too much, but I do have some general kind of life updates or fun things to share. I also want to talk about the decks I've received this month, the decks that I've worked with the most this month, and the books I've read this month. And that's where I'm going to kind of stop the monthly recap. I am not going to be picking any TBR cards for next month. I have a reading plan, so I don't want to mess with that right now. And I also am feeling a big shift in how I'm working with the animal cards and moving into more of a moon phase based engagement with working with particular animals as opposed to animal of the month. So I'm just kind of taking that off the recap for the next couple of months while I figure things out. I do anticipate at least one new topic in the monthly recap going into 2023. We'll, talk about that when we get there. But for today, I just want to talk about some of the highlights of November in kind of my general life, as well as the decks and the books. So the big thing, I guess, very early in the month for me was that I had my Druid Apprentice initiation. So I've talked about before that I completed my candidate study as a Druid with the AODA, and so get to move into Apprentice. And I made a video talking about the Apprentice curriculum and what that looks like for the next couple of years. But it was in November that I actually completed the initiation ritual to go into Apprentice. And our initiation rituals are closed and private, so I can't say too much about the initiation ritual publicly, but I can share that I got to wear the belt that I made. We have different belts in different colors for the different grades in AODA, and this was my first ever macrame project, which I really enjoyed making. It took a fair amount of time, and it's very long because it goes around me quite a few times, and so one end I have this metal ring to close it, and then the other end just ends with a, it's gonna make a bunch of noise there. It's mostly flat like this, and then it goes into a twist and it ends here. So it just goes around 3 times and then kind of hangs. And so I got to wear my macrame belt in my initiation, and that was very exciting. I really enjoyed the macrame, actually. I feel like I want to macrame more things. So we'll see where that takes me. But I had a lot of fun, and I really am pleased with this, and initiation went really well. And so everything is now official in terms of being an apprentice, both in terms of, the curriculum side and in terms of the initiation side, and I'm very happy with that. I also enjoyed in November workshop, the Animal Guardians workshop with Kelly at the Truth and Story, and so we spent a bit of a morning and a bit of an afternoon. They start at 11 in the morning, the workshops, so I don't know if it was 3 hours or 4 hours, talking about different ways that animals might be incorporated into a spiritual practice, and ways of connecting with those animals or exploring those animals, experiencing them. And we talked about, books that might assist in that and decks that might assist in that. And so it was really fun to be in a group of folks talking about a topic that obviously is near and dear to me. And there is a Kelly Made Me Do It new deck on my pile that I will show you in a minute. I really enjoyed the workshop and definitely got some great new ideas. And the other thing that was in November that I found fun was International Fountain Pen Day. And for folks who don't know, I am a fountain pen enthusiast. I have been happily now in early December opening my first Diamine ink vent, which is an ink advent calendar where you get a little sample of ink just about this size every day. So I've opened I've swatched 3 of them, but I've opened 4 since today is the 4th. And International Fountain Pen Day is just a day where fountain pen enthusiasts, I guess, express their fountain pen enthusiasm once a year. And inevitably there are some sales. And so I treated myself to a new pen on International Fountain Pen Day. And it's going to be the pen that lives with my travel notebook, which is my wallet as well as my planner going into 2023, which I will make a full video about. And I got the Sailor Compass. So it's a green pen. It comes in quite a few different colors, including actually multiple greens. I believe there's a lighter green. And the converter is also green inside, which looks cool. It has this screw lid, and they all come with the same, what is described as a medium fine MF nib. It's my first Sailor pen, but I've enjoyed many a Sailor ink, and I've been very interested in trying a Sailor pen. Sailor pens tend to be on the expensive side, but this as a day-to-day pen is perfect. I would never get a really expensive pen for a day-to-day pen because if I'm going to be carrying it around everywhere, you know, I want something that if I lose it or something that I'm okay with it, you know? So it's not the fanciest pen, but I'm really pleased with how it looks inside my traveler's notebook. Matches perfectly. So that was my treat on International Fountain Pen Day. My first, because I didn't know last year that it was a thing. I also got a wrap, and it's an ink kind of swirl. And so this has soft, fuzzy inside. And so you can just keep your pens, 6 of them, in these little pouches. And you can see that the stitching there separates it into 6. And then you can roll it up, and there's a toggle there so you can keep your pens all protected and tidy if you're, you know, going somewhere and you want to bring multiple pens. This would hold all of the pens that I have. You know, I'm a fairly recent fountain pen enthusiast and don't have dozens of pens. Many people do who are into fountain pens, but I wanted something to be able to hold the pens in a safe way. So that's what I chose. I'm really happy with this. I'm really happy with this pen. So that was my fun things in November. Really, my November was just really, really busy with, of course, you know, my regular 9 to 5, but then a lot of evening things cropping up in November. I had more dental work. I'm halfway through the process of getting a crown on my tooth that I had the what is this called? The root canal on. And I've had some volunteer work. I've had some work with my second job being nighttime meetings. And so it's felt really busy. The semester's wrapping up. So my class is now done. My in-person lecturing is now done, which feels fucking fantastic. We do have an exam later on in December. But other than that, and some grading and some emailing, I'm done, which feels really good. I'm really looking forward to some quiet time this month. I'm looking forward to getting to spend some time on, you know, readings for the year ahead and final touches on the planner and making some end of year tarot tube content and all of these fun things. I also had some vacation days accumulated at work where our vacation days, you're only allowed to roll so many forward into the next fiscal year. It's not very many, and I hadn't been taking vacation days, so I got to book this month a bunch of vacation days in February and March, like a lot of them that were kind of use it or lose it vacation days. Like if you don't take these days off, you do not get to roll them into the new fiscal year. So I pretty much have no 5-day work weeks in February and March, and I'm really excited about it. So amidst all the busyness of this time of year with the semester ending and work being what it is, I've moved into a new position at my day job, which, you know, involves a lot of busyness. It's still the same amount of hours. None of that has changed, but it's lots of new tasks and learning. Amidst all of that, I've gotten to book these days off and have this a bit of a slowdown kind of to look forward to, which I'm really excited about. So that is my November general updates. For the month of November, I received two new decks to my collection. One of which is a Kickstarter that I had backed, a while ago now, and the other was a new purchase in November. So the first one that I just bought this month, and that also came this month, is a Kelly Fitzgerald made me do it purchase, and that is the Untamed Spirit Animal Oracle, which is by Rocco Lombardi, and the illustrations, and the text edited by Francesca Mattioni. And this is a Red Wheel is the publisher, and it's an animal deck, as is probably fairly obvious. I've never had one with this box before, where the box comes out the bottom like that, which is kind of interesting. There are walkthroughs of this deck, including one by Kelly, which are, quite thorough. So I'm not going to get into too much here. There's a guidebook that's kind of yellow inside and gives you, a page for each animal. There's not much in terms of other content in here. There's a little bit about the author and the illustrator, and there's a very short introduction with a suggestion of how to use the oracle. Just a couple of paragraphs. It suggests keeping a journal. And it notes that the oracle contains 50 of the most representative and well-known animals from stories and mythology around the world, which are grouped into earth, water, air, or fire. One thing I find interesting about this deck is that there's not an equal number of each, but it also, I find, doesn't really matter because that kind of suiting is not depicted prominently on the cards themselves. So that's an interesting choice. And then it comes inside in this little tuck box. I will say, I would love if the tuck box was just a little bit bigger to accommodate this, and that was it. I'm into less packaging, but this is packaged really beautifully and really securely, and I'll just show a couple of the cards for folks who haven't seen it. It is a black and ivory deck, I guess. It's not really white. It's black and ivory. And the back have these feathers. It's good cards. It's good kind of mass market cardstock that is glossier than I would prefer, but is not sticky. And the animal images are beautiful, and it just has a couple of keywords for each, which are explained well in the guidebook. The guidebook, I think, is good from what I've read so far, but it's also the kind of deck for me that, you can work with easily without. And this was shown in Kelly's Animal Guardians workshop, and I loved it. And I am very happy to have added this one to my collection. It did arrive very, very, very recently, so I've only worked with it a couple of times, but I love an animal deck, and I love a black and white deck, so this is pretty much right, the kind of deck that I would go for. So there's that. The other deck that I received this month is the Kickstarter, and that's the Endless Oracle. And this deck is by Eric Mile. Apologies, Eric. Maybe. Apologies for not knowing how to pronounce your surname. And it came with a book. That is separate. And the book is very good for this. I haven't read it end to end, but it comes with a full page for each card. And this guidebook, I will say, maybe I'll do a full review of this deck if there's interest in that. The guidebook really does everything that I would want a guidebook to do. It talks about what the card represents. It has a couple of keywords first and then a more detailed paragraph. It also includes creative notes, and this is kind of a first-person reflection from the creator's perspective of what the creator was thinking about each one, right? So where there are kind of references to things that the creator's interested in or particular things that inspired the creator. Those are noted as well. There are unique spreads specifically for this deck and suggestions of how to work with it. I think that this deck is brilliant. I am really into this deck. I think it's great. So it's Maiorama inspired, which means that all of the cards, you could make them a panorama in any order. They line up pretty well. And so that's very interesting, and it's loosely inspired by the tropes and archetypes of Greek myth, English folklore, and fantasy role-play games. This is a really cool deck. And I like the color palette, which is not quite, it's a limited color palette. It's not as limited as some of the limited color palette decks that I have, but it is definitely a limited color palette. And I like that this deck, I would say, it has more so titles on the cards than it does keywords, if that makes sense. Like, the card titles are not meanings, right? They're a title of what is on the card. And I really like that, because when you think about a deck that's inspired by something like mythology, right? Or story or storytelling, the figure by the fire could be a lot of things, right? For a different reader in a different question, in a different circumstance, that figure by the fire could be a lot of things. And I really like how open this deck is in that way. I think it has really unique card titles. Certainly some of them, are ones we've seen before in other decks, but there are quite a few that feel very fresh, and the combination of them feels very fresh to me. I like the art style a lot. I most recently paired this deck with the Transient Light Oracle, which is also a limited color palette deck, and one of the colors in that deck is navy blue. And this and the Transient Light look really good together. I haven't done a ton of readings with this because I've only had it, for a week or so, a week and a half maybe. But I am going to just, say, just based on that little bit of time, that I love this. I love, love, love this Oracle deck already. And I know that I'm going to get a ton of use out of this deck. So those are the decks that I got this month. Decks that I've used the most this month are actually not those two, because they both came quite late in the month. Particularly the Untamed Spirit. I only kind of opened that for myself like 3 days ago, I think. So they're very recent acquisitions. The decks that I've worked with the most are actually the decks that I acquired last month, which were also kind of late in the month acquisitions. So one is the Druidcraft, which, can you believe it took this long, and a lovely friend gifting me their copy for this druid to get the Druidcraft. I haven't edged it yet, but that's part of the plan. So I've been getting to know this deck. I think it definitely needs to be edged in dark green. And I have a Kelly Bear pouch coming for it. So I won't show this one too much. I know everybody's seen the Druidcraft. It's been out for a very long time. I've been enjoying that deck this month. And I've also been enjoying this deck, which is in a beautiful pouch by Peggy Pappas, which suits it perfectly, which is the Great Lakes Tarot. I love this deck. I made a full video of this deck, so if you haven't seen that yet, you can check it out. This deck looks really good in a spread with all the color and kind of color coding, I guess, of the 4 minor suits. And I love seeing the wildlife that I know so well represented in a deck. So that's the other one that I have used the most this month. And I have one more that I have also used a ton this month that I did make a video about this deck, but I think I might make a second video of this deck now that I've used it, because the first video was more of a first impressions, before I'd had a chance. And that is, of course, Star Trek Tarot. I love this deck. This deck, and maybe this is a video I'll make too, I don't know. I'm trying to make big video plans for December. I didn't get as much done last month as I wanted. Maybe something like a top 5 deck releases of 2022. This one would definitely be one for me. And not just because I'm a diehard Trekkie, but this deck has just been such a joy this month. We've been watching Star Trek, the original series in my house, one episode, per day, in a random order, because that's how Chris watched it when it was being rebroadcast when he was a kid in the 70s and 80s. And this deck has just, reanimated that enjoyment of Star Trek that we share. And, getting to re-enjoy that. We've watched Star Trek, the original series, together maybe twice already in our relationship. Certainly we've seen it all before. But this deck is really good. This deck is really good as a deck, and is also just great in having gotten to have rekindled my enjoyment of the original series. I was thinking about this because I saw my friend Kelly Bear made a winter-themed tag, and one of the questions was like a novelty deck that brings you a lot of joy. And I don't really think of decks in my collection so much as novelty decks, but where my brain kind of went was pop culture. Decks I think could be easily seen as a novelty, but this is a really good working deck, I think. I don't know how somebody who knows zero about Star Trek would experience this. Certainly I think that the book makes it approachable for that person, but like as a Trek fan, this deck is so special to me. And this is a deck that brings me so much joy. And not just working with the deck itself, but also then, talking about episodes with Chris when we're watching them together. It's great. I love this deck. I will say, just as an aside, something else that happened in November, as a general life update that I never thought would happen. I saw a Star Trek that I didn't like. We started watching Lower Decks, which is an animated Star Trek, and I don't think I'm going to continue watching it. I really, really, really didn't like it. I feel like a bad Trekkie. But I really didn't like it at all. So that one, we were excited to watch something new related to Star Trek. We watched one episode and we just went back to watching the original series with the deck out. So, oh well. I've been loving the deck though. On to books. So the books that I've read this month, there are 10 of them, but 5 of those are standalone short stories. I am going to confess that in November, I was kind of gaming my statistics a little bit because I set the 100 book goal for the year on Goodreads. Goodreads asks you how many books you want to read in a year. And I've always just picked 100 since they've had that feature, because the year before they introduced it, I had read 99. And sometimes I hit the 100 and sometimes I don't, and that's fine. And I don't really care. But I'm currently at 90. And so I was kind of trying to catch up in November by reading a bunch of things that were really short. I have officially embraced that I am not hitting 100 I'm reading a 400-page science fiction novel that's quite dense right now. I'm not hitting 100 books in 2022, and that's completely fine. But I was still aspiring in November, so that's why I read 10 books. Some statistics from my Storygraph, where I review books. I read 1,551 pages, according to Storygraph, in November. My most read themes, I guess, of books were adventurous, reflective, emotional, and mysterious. All of the books that I read were fiction, and all of them except one were ebooks. So that's some statistical information on my reading for November. The 5 standalone short stories that I read were The Garden by Tomi Adeyemi, The Autobiography of a Traitor and a Half Savage by Alex E. Harrow, Two Truths and a Lie by Sarah Pinsker, The Sufficient Loss Protocol by Kemi Ashingiwa, and The Black Pages by Nnedi Okorafor. So these, some of them are these Kindle-only short story kind of collections that are available. You can get each one kind of very, very inexpensively or borrow them for the Kindle and then return them, and then you don't pay for it. And then some of them are other solo produced short stories. So those are the 5. And I liked all of them except for the one by Alex E. Harrow, which I found problematic. My favorite ones, I will say, were The Sufficient Loss Protocol by Kemi Ashingiwa, who is a debut author, I believe. I thought that this story, The Sufficient Loss Protocol, which is about it's a science fiction book, and I don't want to say too much about it because I think the description of this short story actually gives way too much of the plot away. Like, it felt spoilered in the official description of this short story, which I think is a bit unfortunate. But what I liked about this short story is that the kind of protagonist, if you can call it that, the point of view character, the main character, is a very cold figure who has just wiped out a colony of civilians, basically, and talks about it in the most kind of not nonchalant, but almost nonchalant kind of way. Like, it was a very interesting point of view that I don't see represented very much, and I wish it was longer. I wish that short story was longer. I liked The Black Pages, Nnedi Okorafor. I've never disliked anything that she's written, and I will pick up things that she's written. You know, I've read a lot of her work. So those are the ones that stood out. Two Truths and a Lie by Sarah Pinsker was nicely ambiguous, as was The Garden by Tomi Adeyemi. Both were, they don't really tell you everything that's going on. So I liked that. Those are my 5 short stories. The novels that I read, I received in the mail and was so excited because I had pre-ordered this ages ahead. Unsurprisingly. Surprised to no one that I had this on pre-order from the second that it was available as a hardcover pre-order. The World We Make by N.K. Jemisin. This is the sequel to N.K. Jemison's prior book, right? And that is The City We Became. And these were intended originally to be a trilogy. They became a duology. The author talks about in the afterword of the book why that was, and why kind of writing in this universe in the times that we currently live in had to go from being a trilogy to a duology, for good reason. This is a very on the nose, timely kind of a book and kind of a setting. It's a very contemporarily set fantasy novel focused on New York. And I love the way that N.K. Jemisin writes about New York. I haven't spent a ton of time in New York City. I have been, and I've certainly been to other parts of New York, but I love how New York comes alive, literally, in this series, as the different boroughs have avatars in the form of people. They're personified, right, in the most literal sense, and other cities are personified in this one as well. The personification avatar of Istanbul was a favorite part of this second book. I love N.K. Jemisin. She's absolutely, a favorite, an absolute favorite. And on the back of the book, even on the back of this book, so many other authors that I love say great things about this book. The big middle finger to Lovecraft, thrillingly expansive, glorious fantasy. I enjoyed this. I did find this second book, I will say, it felt a little bit smushed, like things that maybe needed the space of the trilogy were it was hard, I think, to get it in here to feel like the plot had all wrapped up. But I devoured this in 2 sittings, and it's not small. I wait eagerly for any N.K. Jemisin that comes out, so I really, really like this. And for folks who haven't seen this thing is really cool. This bring this cover to life thing. If there's an app that if you put your camera from your phone over this, then N.K. Jemisin's talking head will pop up and tell you things about this book. So that's kind of fun. If you're ever in a bookstore and you want to try that, I would suggest that. This was great. I love this series. I love all of N.K. Jemisin's series. I love this book. So that was my one hardcover book that I read that was not digital. I read also On a Red Station Drifting by Aliette de Bodard, who I've read before, and the author's website describes this universe that this novella and several others are set in as one where the space age has Confucian galactic empires of Vietnamese and Chinese inspiration. Scholars administrate planets, sentient spaceships are part of familial lineages. And this story, On a Red Station Drifting, is very particularly Vietnamese inspired. And this one was is an award-winning novella. It's been out for a number of years. This is not a new release. And it was my favorite so far in this universe, that several of the other novels and short stories as well that Aliette de Bodard has written are in this universe. So I really liked that one, science fictional novella. I read The Cloud Roads by Martha Wells. This had been on my list for a long time. And Martha Wells, of course, is the author of Murderbot. And we all know how I feel about Murderbot, which is that I am adoring fan of Murderbot. And Cloud Roads is a fantasy series, Cloud Roads, is a fantasy novel that starts a series. And I had wanted to read this for a long time because I was curious as to how Martha Wells does fantasy. What would a fantasy by Martha Wells be like? And we're going to get to find that out again because Martha Wells has a new fantasy book coming out in 2023 as well. The Witch King, I believe it's called. And so I wanted to go back and read this older book by her, and I loved it. It has shapeshifters in it as kind of the main characters, and really interesting kind of intergroup dynamics and politicking, and a great complicated main character in this story, The Cloud Roads. I definitely want to read the series. My friend Katie Flowers not so long ago posted a video about, being in the middle of so many series just by virtue of being a fantasy reader. I'm right there, and that's totally true. And so now I'm in the middle of another one, which is this earlier fantasy series by Martha Wells, and so far I love it. Cloud Roads, brilliant. Definitely into it. I read Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon-Ha Lee. There was a particular point in November where I was in a place, I don't want to talk about it too much. I was in a place that I really just needed some awesome non-binary representation in my life and in my fiction. And so I deliberately kind of went searching for that and found, a couple of books. And one of them was Phoenix Extravagant by Yoon-Ha Lee. And Yoon-Ha Lee also wrote, I think it's called the Machineries of Empire trilogy. This very, very complex science fiction series, which I read the first book of and I'm in the middle of, and I plan to read the second and third. But Phoenix Extravagant is a standalone, and I would say definitely a sci-fi fantasy. Like, it is definitely both, leaning slightly more into the fantastical. And it has a flying dragon in it, and a non-binary protagonist, and this system of magic relating to making pigments and inks by grinding down artworks that is really interesting to me and felt really fresh. And there are some really interesting kind of familial dynamics in this one between the protagonist and their sister, and some interesting kind of political aspects in this book relating to kind of resistance against a colonial occupation, and the protagonist going to work for kind of an arm of that occupation despite disagreeing with it profoundly, trying to help family, and really, really good. I would say that the Phoenix Extravagant is not as nearly as complex as the Machineries of Empire trilogy was by a long shot. And it was, I think, lighter in tone by a ways as well. But I really liked it. I liked Phoenix Extravagant, and I like Yoon-Ha Lee a lot. And the last one that I will mention is The Bruising of Kilwa, which I just finished, by Nassim Jamnia. And this is another non-binary protagonist book, and it's by a non-binary author. And this is a very much Persian-inspired world, fantasy world that is a queer normative world. And the main character is a healer. And the plot is kind of ostensibly about a kind of medical mystery, I guess, that this kind of healer is trying to get to the bottom of. But then really what the book, I think, is about, and what the book is more interesting when it's about, is the main character being adept at a particular kind of way of working medicine that is not accepted in the society that they're in. And there are themes around kind of displacement and being seen as foreign in a particular kind of way, and navigating issues around gender. And it was really well done, I thought. There were parts of it that I think could have used, again, like more room to breathe in terms of the length, but I liked it. And this was a debut as well, and I would read Nassim Jamnia very happily again, based on this one. So that's what I read in November, and that's pretty much the end of my recap. I can already tell you I'm going to have some fun things to share in December's recap, which will be strange because December's recap is already, that's also New Year's, right? So I feel like it's going to have to be something a little bit different. I don't know. And I'm just going to say I'm quite pleased with myself for having stuck with these monthly recaps every single month. Late or not, I have managed to get through the year, all the way to the end of November anyway, maintaining the monthly recaps. And I think I will continue these. I find them a fun little look back at what I've been up to. So I think I'll keep those up. I have some fun content planned for January, a lot of it having to do with looking forward to the new year and planning some of what my explorations will look like in the new year. So I'm looking forward to sharing those with you. I wish you all a happy December, and I'll see you all soon.